How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Sam Manvir. Yeah, it's a fairly busy time, which is great when you're a consultant. So mustn't complain.
Yes. So one of the things that I was actually looking at was your website.
Mm,
And before obviously having you come on and speak to me, I thought let me have a look and see what you're up to. And a lot of what I saw was I read one of your articles on there as well
yeah,
about sort of forward thinking and about biopharmaceuticals. So tell me a bit about your consulting company then. What was the
sure.
organization?
Yeah, so the organization is me. So I'm a one-man consultancy band. And what I'm doing is really helping provide my experience from throughout my career to companies that are either very small and don't have the expertise that obviously I can bring, or companies that are moving into new spaces. And Because of the various things that I've done throughout my career, I can bring quite a wide ranging level of experience, everything from laboratory science and manufacturing through to how you structure and manage companies. And I do different projects pretty much across that broad spectrum, actually. So some companies will be really very small. I was actually just talking to one, less than half a dozen people who are developing a really fantastic novel technology. And what I'm helping them do is work out how they can actually apply that technology in the biopharmaceutical sector. The things that are important to the
Yeah.
customers, the things they need to bear in mind when they're designing it, etc. Another one of my current customers is a new company that wants to move into manufacturing, and probably move quite quickly into commercial manufacturing. So I'm helping them work out actually how they're going to do that, the stages and steps they have to go through before they can reach that point. And Yeah, it's always very varied.
Yeah, I think consultancy is quite a unique one, I think, because as you said, you're a one-man band. How have you found it then, that transition from sort of being a part of an organization
Mm,
to being a one-man band? What are the pros
yeah,
and what are the cons? And yeah,
sure. Yeah, it's interesting actually because I would have probably never said this when I was fully employed by an employer, but actually sometimes consultants I think get a bit of a bad reputation, um, and the reason for that is I'm not being terribly damning, honestly, about the big consultancies out there. But I think what happens is sometimes consultants get put into a position where they don't necessarily have the experience they need.
okay,
Whereas being a one-man band, I obviously will speak to potential customers. If what they need from me isn't my experience, I will tell them. I say, look, that's really, I don't have
yeah,
the right level of experience in that. And I'll see if I can find someone who can. So the other thing is sometimes I think people, particularly new graduates, actually can get sort of pushed into a consultancy role, which
mm,
is really difficult for somebody who's got literally no experience of working in the industry and actually how you do things. Whereas what I always think, I'm bringing it really from the diametric opposite end of, I've run companies, I've run
yeah,
research groups, development groups, etc. So with me, there's quite a lot of level of I've been there and done it, and I do have the scars, by the way. Um, and the thing I always really, really try to do is to help people not make the same mistakes we did back in the day. Um, and that I think is probably the biggest biggest thing I'd really like to see is for small young companies actually to listen to listen to people that have been there before, so that we can save them a lot of time and money
yeah,
from the experiences, and actually that's what they're paying for.
yeah. One of the points you just mentioned, I've thought about before as well, because when I was graduating, I thought, could I do a consultancy job? Because there's a
Mm,
lot of companies, huge companies that are offering,
yeah,
that they will consult on absolutely anything, whether it be pharma, agriculture, whatever, they'll cover everything.
Yeah.
And I've always thought to myself, I'm not experienced in this field. How would I be in a position to give advice to another company
Yeah.
when I have no experience in it whatsoever? So it's interesting you say that
Mm.
because you,
Yeah. I mean, as I say, I don't want to I don't want to speak ill of the
yeah,
um, large consultancy companies, but I would agree with you.
yeah,
And I haven't seen this firsthand, but I've heard people talk about engaging with consultants, and they literally just regurgitate sort of management textbooks,
mm,
which isn't necessarily very helpful.
yeah.
You need people who've earned their stripes, really.
Yeah, because I guess it's a case of you building a tailored plan for whoever
Mm,
you're working with and not just, a cookie cutter
yeah,
type model where you can just apply it to anything and everything. Because
yeah.
I'm sure every company you interact with will have challenges that, another company might not have.
Absolutely, yeah. Each customer is completely unique. Um, they all have completely different requirements. They've, frequently have completely different business models, for
Mm.
example, really down to that sort of basic level of how things get run. Um, and one of the really good things, I do a bit of work with a larger consultancy as well. So they basically subcontract to me. Um, and that's really good because with that we can put together teams who have that experience and that different experience together, to help small and medium-sized enterprises.
Your company, or you was working for an
Yeah.
organization, you moved into sort of consulting.
Mm,
How did that affect your sort of quality of life? So in terms of work balance and,
yeah,
you mentioned that you was married and you have
I do.
children.
2 children. Yeah.
How was that for you then?
Yeah. So that's a really, really good question. And I'll give you a little bit of perspective.
Mhm.
So, my last long-term and full-time job, I was one of an executive team who built a contract development and manufacturing organization. And that organization, if anyone wants to look it up, is called Abzena. And we started off with bringing two organizations together here in the UK, actually here in Cambridge. And then we went into back-to-back acquisitions in the US because what we wanted to do was to create a company that could do everything from DNA sequence to antibody drug conjugate, drug substance manufacturing, all in one company. And this was based purely on contract services. So we didn't have our own products. And at that time when we were doing this, it was unique. There was no other company in the world that did DNA to ADC. So we needed to have manufacturing, and actually that's why I joined the sort of nascent company, was to bring my experience in development and manufacturing in. So we acquired a site on the west coast US, just north of San Diego, which, by the way, is a wonderful place to have a site. And then we acquired a chemistry site for the conjugate and linker side, uh, just north of Philadelphia, northeast east of Philly. Um, and then with those three sites, we had the capability. And then I spent the best part of 4 years helping integrate those different sites into customer programs, making sure we had the capabilities that we needed at each site and how they mesh together. So the reason I'm talking about this is because that meant that I spent not equal but unequal periods of my life at that time with two, at that time, young children
Yeah.
in Cambridge, UK, San Diego, and Philadelphia. Most of my time, for 1 year, I spent more time in San Diego than I did here in South
Wow.
Cambridgeshire, and that's quite tough. My kids were, let me think, still, both of them were still at junior school at that time, so pretty young.
Yeah.
And me not being around. My wife, by the way, works full time, always has as well. So it's a pretty tough thing to do. So yeah, when I After we sold Abzena and I exited the organization, it was from a work-life balance. It was a lot better.
Yeah,
But obviously, the thing about consultancy, and particularly over the last 3 years, is it's very difficult. It's very uncertain. And you have to spend a lot of time doing your own business development, so basically selling your services.
yeah,
And the last 3 years have been pretty tough because of the macroeconomic situation.
yeah.
It's not anything specific to pharmaceuticals necessarily. All industries have had a tough time over that period.
I think something you mentioned there that really caught my interest was that you mentioned sort of the difference in it's kind of the different energies you have to put into consulting
Yeah,
versus having a job. So whereas if you're working for Abzena or whatever company it may be, you have to be less, I don't want to say less driven, but less sort of your scope might be a little bit more focused.
mm,
Whereas if you're, from what I'm understanding, whereas if you're a consultant, you have to sort of sell yourself, make connections, and then actually do your
yeah,
job as well of
yeah,
analyzing and
yeah, absolutely. And what you find yourself doing as well, particularly for me, my most of my customers are small enterprises, relatively early stage, is looking at who could be your next customer. As I say, it's a business development role.
yeah,
I used to do it when I was selling contract services years ago. But keeping an eye on, who the new companies are in your area of expertise. Um, and, one of the things in our sector is that it is a very, very small community. Here in the UK, it's really small. So I don't want to say everybody knows everybody, but it's not far off.
yeah,
And quite often, somebody will be an in to a
yeah,
new organization. So I think, coming back to what you were saying earlier, if I had to give anybody any advice, it would be that actually, that in the world of work, because you have a particular background, you will come across the same people repeatedly. And maintaining those good interpersonal relationships is absolutely critical. And
yeah,
don't burn any bridges. Um, and everything we do is about people.
yeah,
Um, AI is not going to be able to manufacture a drug for you. Not yet, anyway.
yeah,
Um, you know, we don't have fully automated manufacturing yet, and that is one of the things that I always tell people is look after your people.
yeah,
They are your number one asset through academia, and obviously that's all the way up to PhD level. You do absolutely focus down and become an expert on something very small.
yeah,
In my worldview, and obviously I had to do the same thing. But I think the biggest change for me when I left Leicester and got my first job at Cantab Pharmaceuticals was that you don't ever actually go back to a point where you are an expert about that one thing. Everything you do is much more broad. Um, and I'm using this from a personal experience level. I'm sure there are roles out there, maybe in large pharma, where you can be equally as focused. But in my experience, particularly working in smaller companies, which I always have, you become much more of a generalist
yeah,
because actually that's what companies need. They need people with the scientific background, of course, but it's what else do you bring to that role? And I suppose that's what I've spent my whole entire career doing is going from being quite narrow in my first role, which was upstream process development, then taking on additional roles within broader management and then on the way up. So I think everything still comes back to the credibility you have though. as a scientist. So that is still important. And I even do it now with my consultancy. I'll sit and look at growth curves, metabolite data, etc. And there's one meeting I had when I was at Alzina that really comes to mind. We had a new customer, and we were sat in a meeting room with them, and they were going through quite a big detailed presentation about their process. And I started asking them questions, and the guy who was presenting just kind of stopped and looked at me as if, oh my God, this guy actually knows what he's talking about. Whereas I think he was expecting me to be sort of a faceless suit who didn't actually know anything.
I really like what you said there, because one of the things that I noticed throughout my PhD, but also through friends that I have currently that are still doing their PhD, is they get so hung up on making sure that the data is perfect,
Hmm.
or the experiments they are running are perfect, and
Yeah,
that the story they tell is perfect, and that leads to other problems in academia. But from a student's perspective, as an individual's perspective, I think it doesn't need to be perfect, because
no,
once you're out in the real world, you're never going to need to be that specialized at anything. And most likely, the job you actually do won't be in that exact same role anyway, right?
yeah, yeah,
So you will have to learn new things on the go, and actually stressing yourself and grinding yourself, into the ground over a tiny bit of detail because you want it to be perfect, and
yeah,
delaying things.
yeah.
I just don't find it to be very productive.
No. Do you know that is one thing? So somebody I worked with for quite a long time actually. That was kind of part of my mentorship with her, was to help her realize absolutely fantastic person, by the way,
Mm.
really, really good. But she was of that personality type where things had to be perfect. And in my book, nothing is perfect. So therefore, you're actually wasting an awful lot of time and effort and resource, which is always a problem in
Yeah,
industry,
yeah.
trying to make something perfect when it can't be. So it was helping her kind of recognize that and get her to the point where she could recognize what good enough was. That
How,
was the important thing.
how do you do that then? So if you've got somebody, as you mentioned, that
Yeah, yeah.
how do
So
you,
it's a whole process, and it normally starts with a conversation about, okay, what are the next experiments you're planning and why, and you would look at that in retrospect with what they've already generated and say, how much more is that really going to give you, or is this really important? If the answer is no, you don't do it, and then you kind of slowly, it's almost like a weaning
yeah.
process, um, and and it's only through doing that firsthand, I think, that people can get a good appreciation. And I wouldn't say I was necessarily any worse than anyone else when I first came out after doing a PhD.
Yeah.
I can think of the first process I worked on at Cantab. We went through so many iterations of that process, probably needlessly, because I just wanted it to be better. And then you realize, we've spent a long time, which luckily we had, but did it really make us move forward?
Yeah. It can be a hard habit to break, right?
Yeah.
Especially, I find, especially because scientists, it's in their nature to be very precise about things.
Mm,
So people that naturally sort of follow that academic PhD, and then whether it be industry or stay in academia, they're naturally very analytical, precise. Most of them that I've
mm,
met are very sort of precise people, and for them, something that falls below that standard is just not acceptable.
mm,
And I think one of the things where if you work in academia, you can fall into a trap where you can keep going in that cycle of repeating and repeating and repeating. Whereas at
yeah.
least if you're working for a company, you have other sort of metrics you need to meet. You have deadlines, you have money
Yeah.
that you know
That's right.
you can't spend 6 years trying to perfect one
No,
little.
no.
Yeah.
I think the precision is still equally as valid because, as you've just said, we have endpoints, goals, objectives in the industry that are um, generally financially driven. And to meet those, you do have to still put in extremely high quality work.
Yeah.
I think it's more a case of what you choose to do. It is probably more pertinent. Um, really good story sprang to mind actually when you were talking there, because I was quite an early adopter of statistical experimental design, so DOE,
Yeah.
and we had a process that was going into phase three, so the last phase of clinical testing before commercial, and we were something like the sixth sponsor of this product, and so it'd been turned from pillar to post. We had it. We wanted to get it to commercial. But all of the development work that had been done through its life cycle, through its lifetime, um, was pretty minimal. So
Okay.
we've got it at a critical point, very little data about actually how you run this process, how you control it, how you get a product that's of an appropriate quality, etc. So it was the first time I really took DOE and applied it to something pretty important. So we did this. We proved a number of things in the process that nobody knew anything about were important, and there was one critical parameter. And I was lucky enough in those days we had an in-house statistician. So we did a nice screening experiment, moved on into an optimization experiment, and coming back to the precision, we did the initial optimization. Went right, okay, the optimum looks like it's around about here,
Yeah.
and then I went, do you know, I'd really like to know actually what it is, because here is, you know, is a round figure. So we designed another experiment, went in, and we got a different optimum. So I
Mm.
then went to my friendly statistician and showed him all the data. And he very quickly said, "You know what you've done, don't you?" I was like, "No, that's why I'm here asking you." And he said, "You've just gone too narrow. All you're seeing is noise from your analytical technique. So there's precision, and then there's reasonable precision."
Yes. And I think finding that sort of that balance, especially for PhDs, is very important, knowing where you've gone a bit too far. And I think for me, I remember quite precisely there was this sort of pin drop moment where, I think I was about 2 years into my PhD. I was naturally, I'm one of those people that want the project to be perfect. So I want everything I do, I want to make sure it's as best as it could be. And a lot of what I was doing was weighing out these polymers that I was going to be dissolving. And I remember thinking, even if the weight was slightly off, it would really annoy me
Yep.
because now practically it wouldn't make any difference. But in my head, it was always one of these things where I thought if it's off, it's going to throw everything off.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was lucky to have a postdoc in the lab with us. And he gave me a piece of advice. He said to me, look, if there's something to be seen, you will see it.
Mm.
And when I thought about that, it's really a philosophical way of doing science. It's a way of saying, if it's meant to be, it will
Yeah.
be. And I adopted that approach quite quickly because for me, for whatever reason, it really sank in. And then after that point, everything I did was up to the same standard, but I wasn't killing myself
Yeah.
to meet, that very perfect, unreasonably high standard.
Yeah.
And it just took the pressure off.
Yeah.
It just, yeah,
I think that was a really good piece of advice, actually, because the sort of, I suppose, the other way of looking at it is, if the outcome you're after is so narrow and critical, you won't be able to make that in the real world.
yeah,
You know, coming from a sort of development and manufacturing background, we talk a lot about process robustness. You know, how robust is a process? How can you move away from the ideal and still get what you need? And the last thing you need in a manufacturing setting is something that has to be so precise that you can't actually make it.
what advice would you give to somebody who's becoming a manager?
Mm,
Maybe it's their first role in management and they've just had a step up and
yeah.
they, what advice would you give to them to say, look, this is what you should be doing, or
Mm,
some of the things to consider to become a
yeah,
mentor and to make sure the people around you also grow and flourish?
sure. So I think the first thing I would say is quite often when you make that first move up the ladder, if you like, is when you really realize that everything you do is through your people.
Yeah.
And therefore, the first thing I would say is really get to know whoever it is who reports to you. And when I say that, what I mean is what motivates them, what do they like, what don't they like, and there's nothing wrong with actually sitting down with somebody and saying, what actually motivates you? What are the things that get you going? Because then you can understand them, you can help them, you can make sure their job is rewarding, for example. And you may have, let's say, a team of three people. You
Yeah.
could find you've got three people there that either could work really well together because they're complementing, or you might find you've got two that are going to bang each other's heads against the wall, and one that actually fits quite nicely in the middle. So yeah, get to know your people, get to know what motivates people, get to know the kinds of people they are. You can have a team of three or four extroverts that really really annoy the introvert, um, and and then work from there. And I suppose the other thing is, don't be scared of asking them what they need as
Mm.
well. Um, when this was in the Cantab days, actually, um, when we had our first formal appraisal system come into place at Cantab, so this would have been 1998, I suspect. Um, there was a really great piece within the whole process when you're doing someone's appraisal, which was a sort of 360, which was, what have I done well this
Mm.
year? What could I have done better for you? And that really helps as well. So that helps you become better for the people that report into you to help them.
That last point is very well. There's 2 points that I pick up there. So I think the last point you mentioned was very interesting in that the 360 and actually reflecting on yourself and not just sort
Mm,
of looking outwards, I think is very
mm,
important because
yep,
I think in every relationship I've had, professional or whether it be with my partner or whatever relationship it has been, it always gets better if you think about actually what have I done wrong and what could I have done better rather than saying what have
yeah,
you done wrong and what
yeah,
could you have done better. So I
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
And the other thing you mentioned as well is actually sitting them down and finding out the strengths and weaknesses,
mm,
understanding who's in front of you. And I didn't think he was going to say that actually because
mm.
it seems a bit too simple.
Well, unless you ask people,
Yeah.
unless you give them airtime with you, um, two things. A, how do you know who they are?
Mm.
And B, how do they know who you are?
Yes.
Um, so to give you real world example, when I worked for 12 months at Freeline Therapeutics, that's the first thing that I did. I scheduled 30-minute meetings, not just with the people who reported to me, but the people within the totality of my
Wow.
responsibility. It took a little while to get through them all. And I apologize to them all, but that was exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to see the people. I wanted to understand who they were, what got them going, where they fitted in the organization, and where they could.
That came to my mind while you was talking about managing teams and different types of
Mm.
people. Have you managed teams where, you've had a group of people and you thought this just isn't working out, or there's been a problem amongst people in your team?
Yeah.
And if so, what did you do about it? How did you manage that?
Yeah. A few, I think, is probably the answer. Yeah, I think that when you've got problems within teams, it comes down to working out why. What actually is the root of the problem? And you can only really do that through dialogue. So
Mm.
speaking to the different people, and working out exactly what issues are. And sometimes I've actually used a completely different approach, which is if you've got issues, you actually say to the people, how would you mend this? And
Okay.
stand it on its head. Because actually, um, people who are working, let's just use the vernacular, the coal face, they know the solutions because they're in it day in, day out, or they generally do. So actually asking people how they think they should change things, you can't always do it, obviously, but at least offer people the opportunity to solve their own problems. Um, and there's one example I can think of where doing that, the answer obviously wasn't going to fly. And then it's just a case of helping them recognize why it wouldn't work and how, therefore, they have to either accept the status quo as it is or think about something else that might work better.
Yeah. I like that a lot because it's very transparent
Mm,
rather than having doing things that people can see the
mm,
rationale behind your thinking,
yeah,
and so it kind of makes them take your perspective as well and see
yeah,
why and why not.
yeah. I think one of the things about managing people, and obviously nobody can know everything all of the time because that isn't how the world works. But I suppose if and when people ask me about my management style, probably not surprisingly, I'd say it's very open and as inclusive as it can be, because that's how you get the best out of people, including people, as you say, not just making them feel part of it, but actually being part of it.
Yeah.
And it can be anything, it can be a project, it could be a company, um, and that really is how you get the best out of people, I think.